Cool. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining, managing, calculating APRs for state disclosures. Um, we're going to go ahead and get started with James Wilson from TimeValue. He is going to go ahead and review all of the nuts and bolts for calculating these state disclosures. And then we will pass it off to Brian here at North Tech to take a deep dive on the inner machinations of this product. So, James, ready for you to kick it off.
Perfect. Thanks, Jen. So happy to have everyone here. And APR is becoming an increasingly more important calculation, specifically around changes in disclosure laws. So I want to start at a high level of what APR is. I'm sure everyone attending is very familiar with APR, but I think this is a succinct definition that breaks down all of the components that are going into APR and why an exact calculation that's precise is so important. So APR it's a standardized measure that is used to calculate the cost of borrowing on an annual basis. And it's going to include not only your interest rate, but all of your other fees and associated costs associated with the loan. And APR is expressed as a percentage that represents the actual yearly cost of cash flows over the term of the loan. And APR becomes increasingly more difficult to calculate as more variations are added into the calculation itself. But why is this calculation so important? And it's because mistakes in APR is a great way to open yourself up to a lawsuit. APR is a precise calculation, and even a small mistake can result in problems down the road, problems that you and your firm would like to avoid and not encounter. And accuracy matters. That's a slogan of TimeValue software. Our APR calculation has been perfected over the years. TimeValue has been in business for over 40 years. And the calculation in the math behind how we do APR is perfect. It's so perfect that we've even had our amortization schedules accepted in legal cases where as soon as a judge sees a T-value schedule, will instantly sign off on the party that has calculated their APR through T-value. And when you're going through an APR calculation with the T-value product, whether it's T-value online or in TValue Direct for Salesforce, the APR calculation is locked behind the scene. So whatever inputs you put into the T-value interface will go into the APR calculation, but the manner and the math in which the APR is done cannot be changed regardless of user input. That means that it is literally impossible for any mistakes to be made when calculating the APR. This is especially important, as I mentioned before, when calculations get more complex, and I'll dive a little bit more into what those complexities are. Specifically for your firm, if you're doing variations in interest, simple interest versus compounding calculations, or if there's ever any irregularities in date counting. So if you have a client that misses a payment, you have skip payments, you have a lump sum that comes in on a particular date that you weren't expecting, all of these make changes into how APR is calculated, especially if there's other points and fees that are factored in as well. And if you're doing these calculations in Excel, it's very easy to make one small mistake in a formula that will throw off the entire calculation at the end, and it'll mess up your APR. And I've seen that happen time and time again, where I'll have a client call in and say, hey, T-value saying the APR is this, but I don't think that's right because this is what's coming out in Excel. Then I'll ask a question and say, oh, well, what formulas are you using for Excel? And that individual will be using a pre-built Excel formula, assuming that Excel is using the formula the right way. But there might be an oversight where Excel didn't account for that you're using, say, 360 days, and the Excel formula will default to 365. But if you're using a default Excel formula, you're not going to see that unless you click on the exact details. So when you're trying to do one of these calculations and say you're getting to a point where there's 4, 5, 6, 7 different formulas that are all tying into how the APR is calculated, it's a huge headache to make sure that you're going to have to go through and check all of those individual components. And also, if there's any changes in date counting, you have to go back and change the formula yourself. With TValue, all of that is done behind the scenes, instantly, seamlessly. It's just point and click buttons, and as soon as you change any of those inputs in TValue, the APR is instantly going to adjust the math perfectly for you and provide that accurate number. So in terms of your team, as you're calculating APR, how do you make sure that the inputs that you're putting in are correct? It all comes down to the rules. So if you're using, say, a monthly calculation, if you're using monthly for your compounding basis, but then you have, say, some changes in date counting, whether those are, say, instead of coming in on the 1st, a payment comes in on the 14th, or if there's any late fees that are being added in as well. You can make sure that the compounding period that you're using matches the math that's being done with the APR. So for example, if you have these irregularities and you want to change to exact days, where instead of being calculated on a 12 interval basis, the interest is calculated on an individual daily basis, the APR will instantly see, or the math behind the scenes will know that the APR needs to be calculated based on the inputs that you've changed. So it takes away a lot of the headache from the user. It guarantees 100% accuracy, and it's something that can be done simply in a matter of minutes rather than hours of arduous work in Excel. So the final note that I'll touch on in terms of handling these calculations is if you run into any difficulties where your team is unclear about which inputs need to be put to make sure that you're getting the APR calc that your client is looking for, you have to make sure that your client understands the rules for the computation method. And this is something that would be agreed upon beforehand. So when you're running multiple pricing runs in TValue Direct, it's very easy because you have a clone feature. So you can essentially send a bunch of different options, which will be calculated by the TValue calculation engine hosted on AWS. These will be put back into Salesforce for you to view, and then you can send this to your client, which will already be included in the amortization schedule. So by the time your client even sees the schedule, they're going to see how the APR was calculated. It's going to be fully disclosed to the client, the manner in which it was the computation was calculated, and then they'll sign off on it. So in that sense, you and your team can rest at ease knowing that the APR has been properly calculated, that it's clearly stated and included in the documentation, that the client has seen it, it's been fully disclosed, and they've signed off on it. So from a legal standpoint, you'll be completely covered. You can rest assured that the calculation is 100% accurate. And then if you have any other details that arise that your client has questions for that you and your team aren't prepared to answer, you can always reach out to us at Time Value Software and we can provide support on any of those issues.
That's great. Thanks, James. We'll go ahead and pass it off to Brian now to go ahead and take a deep dive into the platform with NorthTech.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, James. So I'm sharing my screen here. I'm just going to do a walkthrough of TValue Direct. And I am showing this here in Salesforce. I'm doing it from our loan origination systems application object. You can do this from your own custom objects. You can do this from an opportunity, obviously. Any parent object here in Salesforce can be leveraged in TValue Direct. In this example, I'm going to quote at the deal level, but if you are doing asset-based pricing, TValue Direct will support it that way. And you can see here in our application, we've actually already quoted once, during a prospecting phase. We now have a credit app that has been approved, and we're ready to apply risk-based pricing here. A couple of things to note here. My financed amount is sitting at $50K. If we scroll down here, you'll see we do have some fees on the documentation side that we're going to include in this transaction. I could come in here and start a quote. James mentioned this from cloning the original. I'll show you that later on, but I'm going to start with a net new quote here. And to do it, I will hit new here, and it's going to open up the TValue Direct screen. And the first thing it's going to ask me is what template do I want to use? TValue will ship with 5 different templates. You can apply custom templates to meet your own business process here. That is supported. We have a number of clients running their own custom templates, but I'm just gonna use this lease template, and this does come out of the box with TValue Direct. You can see here that my data has moved over from the parent object. So I have my 50K, I had a rate that was plugged in, my period is there. We had a residual applied to the equipment, and all of that has flown in here. We can name this, and the $1,500 fee that we saw there has moved over. Had we had additional upfront charges that would have summed up in here, and we can leverage this. This is important because this is going to be leveraged when we calculate the APR. This is something that the states are kind of requesting be built into that calculation. And this new version of TValue Direct is ensuring that we can use these values upfront, where previously you were perhaps running different T-value quotes to get to the final numbers. I certainly can work up this quote from my header screen if I had changes I wanted to apply, commissions I wanted to apply. I can make edits in here. Ideally, we're ready to go so that you can just click populate and move it into your calculator. Now we are ready to solve for the payment, unless we wanted to work up some deferral schedules, change our dates perhaps. You can continue to work this deal up in the calculator by inserting rows and inserting payment schedules. But if you are, in this example, I'll just move forward with that 36 months. It is ready to go. It is ready to calculate. One thing to note here is we did move that 1,500 on the charges side down into the calculator. You'll see that the points and fees are accounted for there. If I select loan details, we've moved that 1,500 in. And again, that is important for our APR calcs. I did go ahead and calculate that. You'll see it did solve for a payment. And James mentioned this, the amortization schedule is of course saved off. We do have various ways that you can take that out of Salesforce, whether that be PDF, Excel, or Word, that is immediately available. And then if we want to save this to our parent object, we'll just make it selected and save and close that quote. Now I could continue to go back and forth with my borrower perhaps and continue to quote it. We mentioned cloning. If you wanted to start from there and clone, you could come directly into the quote itself and move about it that way. You'll see all of that data is now saved into Salesforce. I have the full cash flow saved off. I have the full amortization schedule saved off in data records in Salesforce. I have my finance charges and I have all of the rates, right? So I can see I've got my APR now calculated. It included the other charges that we were charging up front. This data will move back to the parent object. That is configurable as to which data you may move back. You'll see I've got a number of data elements that have now come back to the application here. I have that APR, I've got start dates and payment schedules. If we wanted to kind of move about that in a quicker fashion, you can use this quick T-value quote option. It's going to do the same thing that we just walked through. It's just not going to present it in the calculator form where you have kind of some more complex structures you could work up. This is going to present you with the header and the ability to calculate straight away. It will still save the quote there. Because all that data is available to us, we certainly can print it on any disclosure forms. So if I pull that data out of my parent record, I can print off a disclosure just because I ran the one T-value quote. So this is a simple example that, you know, we can take a look at where that data has come over from T-value. You can see we have our finance charge, the APR, and the data is readily available to send outbound, get to our borrower, or get to any reporting agencies. And that is really it. That's really the update there in terms of the latest TValue Direct release that is out now. So
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining. If you do have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email. We will be sending the recording of this over to everybody. Yeah, thank you guys so much for attending, and we will speak to you all soon.
excellent. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you everyone for your
Thanks,
time.
James.